Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to the newest edition of Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette. Today we are joined by Shotokan instructor Tim Kiel. How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
So, Tim, I actually first met in, I believe it was 1990, was my first experience with Shotokan, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But first of all, with Tim, now where did you first come upon martial arts? At what age and kind of what drew you to it?
Well, I was 18. That was many years ago, and stumbled across it. I heard it. I wasn't living in the St. Cloud area, but I heard it was just starting up. So I started making trips back and forth, and just kind of fell into it. No big story or any secret motivation. It just kind of happened, and that was in early '73.
And was Shotokan your first and only style? Have you studied any other styles?
Yes, no. Shotokan was the only one that really interested me. It was very technique orientated, and the timing was right. Everything worked out, so it just took off from there.
And then how long before you kind of decided or came to the conclusion that you wanted to teach? Did you start assisting it as a lower belt?
I started assisting, after a couple years in, and then my instructor had moved away. And then back then, this is now, the mid 70s, and there really wasn't much around. So I started teaching a class, and then I had some other professionals that watched me teach and took some classes and encouraged me to go on. So I just decided I will be a professional karate instructor. There was no book to tell you what to do, so I just bought a $5 briefcase and a suit and went around and introduced karate all over central Minnesota. I was the first professional instructor. So then back then I introduced classes in Hutchinson, Wilmer, Brainerd, Alexandria, and I had clubs in those towns for many years. Wow. And then from there I developed other instructors. So we had at a point we had 18 towns going on with classes, and you were part of one of those satellite clubs as well. So it just kind of blossomed from there. So
when you first started doing that and branching out, were you yourself going and teaching in each one of those cities?
I was, yes.
Wow. That must have been quite a commitment.
Yes. I was, 4 nights a week I was on the road, and I taught locally. So I was teaching 6 days a week. Sometimes I was teaching, and then I had some day classes, and I was sometimes teaching 25, 26 classes a week, which was really too much.
That's quite a bit.
When you're all revved up and you're young, you can do it.
You're indestructible when you're young,
yes,
obviously.
Exactly, yeah.
So about how long did it take before you started? Now, did you wait until they were black belts to let them start teaching, or did you?
Yes. No.
So how long did that on average take before you could take a little break and let someone else take over?
Well, I turned it over to people, and it was they were more assistants. And then as time went on, actually in some of these towns, because these guys, most of them were young professionals, young, married, developing families, so it was hard to keep instructors. That was the big problem. And so things kind of dwindled down because I couldn't do it myself. And some of the towns that I turned over to other instructors that I was frequently teaching, after a while, the students that were accustomed, as once you have your instructor, it's hard to follow someone else. So It didn't always work out as good as I thought, but I did have some good instructors.
So how many branch schools do you currently have right now?
Well, now I'm just in Sartell and Little Falls, and we had a class. And the last few years, I dropped most of my programs. So this last year, it's just been Little Falls in the St. Cloud area.
So then back then, like the 70s, early 80s, what are some of the moments you remember that kind of helped? Is there certain things that happened where you saw growth specifically? I know for some people, when certain movies come out, obviously there's people that flock to a martial arts school with like the Karate Kid, obviously, or Kung Fu, the TV series, or Ninja Turtles or Power Rangers. I mean, did you see a lot of those booms in your school?
Well, yeah, because back in the 70s, early 70s, there were very few children in classes, and it was mostly, of course, adults of all ages. But then in the early 80s, things started picking up, offering kids classes. I do think for sure the Karate Kid did help things. I remember that era. But other than that, I can't say anything in particular.
I know for me, the whole reason I found because I grew up in Little Falls, and at the time we only had one school in town. We had a Tung Sudo school, and I had done that for a few years and was looking for something else. And the whole reason I came across your school in St. Cloud, it was, the karate movie boom of the 80s, Van Damme and Seagal and Chuck Norris. And I remember really enjoying Jean-Claude Van Damme and looking into him, and found out that his original art he studied was Shotokan. I'm like, oh, I got to find Shotokan. So I can't remember how, if it was a phone book. Obviously there was no internet back then. And I found a Shotokan school. Yeah. So I actually went down, and I still remember I was all set to join. And I was going to join the day I turned 16 because I could start driving myself to St. Cloud. And I blew my knee out the day before my 16th birthday, and I had to wait. I don't know obviously you probably don't remember, but when I started class, I had a full knee brace on and everything. But
no, I don't recall.
Yeah. But so I ended up pushing it back almost a year before I could start Shotokan lessons, which was depressing for a young kid.
It's too bad. Yeah.
It's the same type thing. It was because of a movie. I found him and looked him up and stuff like that. And he did Shotokan. Obviously what he does on screen isn't Shotokan anymore. He got into a lot more stuff, but I also remember with your school, that was the first school I ever saw a Makiwara board in.
Oh yeah.
I remember I tried making one. I think the first night after one of your classes, I tried making one at home, which obviously didn't turn out too well. Do you still use that in class?
I don't where I'm at now, just because I don't have my regular dojo. I just rent space at a dance studio, so we can't really use a Makiwara. But those Makiwaras took a lot of hits back in the days.
Yes, they did.
Damaged a lot of hands too.
Now, with a lot of people, maybe that aren't familiar with Shotokan. Now, do you guys it's a very traditional style. Do you guys also do competitions too, if I remember?
Yeah, we do. Although it's really the last 5 years, it's really slowed down with the competition. I had some problems too. I had a knee problem about 4 years ago, and had to have some procedures, and then I had to take some time off, and that slowed things down. And then different clubs, it's just hard to find really good clubs that you feel comfortable with, safe with, judges that are fair and not prejudiced, and it's gotten to be a challenge with the competition. Different rules and so on, different ideas of how to score, and doing katas and what some people call patterns. Mm-hmm. It's hard to appreciate sometimes other styles because you just go like, that doesn't look right, and then they'll get a high score, and it's just sometimes you don't get it as being from a traditional background.
Yes.
Going back with me, back in the about 1980. Well, actually before that, in the 70s, I went to Denver and trained with Yutaka Yaguchi, one of the early masters in the U.S. And then years later, I formed a relationship with him, and then eventually he started. This was then the ISKF, International Shotokan Karate Federation. He was coming quarterly and doing rank exams and seminars, and then through him, which I owe him a lot, he's now retired as well, but he was connected with the Japan Karate Association. So 2 times in the 80s, I was able to host seminars with Master Nakayama, who was one of Mr. Funakoshi's students. Master Nakayama at the time at the time he's passed also, but was the highest ranked traditional karate master on earth, and he had like 10 million students under him. Here he was in St. Cloud, Minnesota.
Wow.
And we had him twice, and it was a big deal. I mean, we promoted it, and we had hundreds of black belts from all over. Well, then after that, I also had Tanaka, who was a world fighting champion from Japan. He was here several times. For people that know traditional Shotokan karate would appreciate that. Master Osaka, who was, if you look in the best karate books from the Japan Karate Association, he's one of the main demonstrators. So he was here. So through that, we were quite fortunate to have some of the top masters in the world into St. Cloud, Minnesota.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
Imagine your students really appreciated that too.
They did.
I mean,
and I look back at it now, and people will go like, I don't think they really knew how big of it was. Now as things have changed, and a lot of organizations have split up and splinter groups and whatever. But at the time, these were the real McCoys. The early guys like Master Nishiyama. There were two main masters from the Japan Karate Association. Nishiyama came here in the early 60s from Japan. He did West Coast. Mr. Okazaki, was East Coast, and I was able to spend time with those gentlemen as well. In fact, in January of 76, Hidetaka Nishiyama did a Midwest tour, and then he came to St. Cloud, and this was coordinated by Robert Fasaro, who was the first instructor in Minnesota. And Mr. Nishiyama came and did a tour through St. Cloud and did the first black belt exam ever in this area. And there was a number of people. I was the only one that passed. So I was actually the first black belt ever awarded in this area.
Wow.
So that's unique. So I had a lot of history. It was big time, big stuff going on back then.
So, but on average, like how long does it? Because I've seen black belt tests from multiple styles. I don't know if I've ever witnessed a Shotokan one. Now, like how long does a Shotokan black belt test last? Can you tell some of the stuff that's involved in it?
Well, you have the three main. You have your Kihon, which is your basics. You first demonstrate all your basics, and they'll give you certain combinations to do, check your form, in your condition. And then the other part is, it's kata, and then you have your what you'd call the form, and you have like a chosen kata that you would do, and then there's different categories that they have to choose from that you don't know what they're going to choose, which gets more complex as you test into higher levels.
Right.
And then you'd have different forms of kumite, where you have, one step, very, very controlled, show your skills, and then you have some free sparring. But the actual exam, if it's all put together, it's maybe half hour.
Okay. That's not bad.
No.
Okay. So then as you go on and get into higher ranks, are the tests more physically demanding also? Like, compare like your fourth or fifth degree to your first degree, how much more difficult as far as just physicality?
Yeah, they are more difficult because they're much more technical, and your katas are longer and more intricate, and so you put a lot of study in because sometimes you don't know what they're going to choose. So you can't just pick the one kata you're going to do. But then when you go fourth and fifth degree, then they usually, and it depends on your age, but generally speaking, it's a very much an endurance test. But you'll spar until you can't hold your arms up anymore.
Wow.
I've seen people, drop down, puke, everything else, because it gets pretty intense. And that's just an old Japanese tradition. That's just the way it is.
Kind of fun. Some old school. Is it still that way then?
Yes.
Now you're currently seventh degree. Okay. And how many years ago did you get your seventh?
That's been about 5 years ago.
Okay. And do you have to travel for your test, or do they come here?
Not anymore. My last rank was awarded by an organization in Minnesota, because the Japanese, well, I shouldn't just say the Japanese, the Shotokan groups have been, the last 10, 12 years, have broken up a lot.
Okay.
And now people that are running, certain organizations, they're of lesser experience and definitely lesser experience than me and other people. So we formed our own board of directors and create exams.
Okay. Have you ever had to travel out of the country? Have you ever had to go to Japan to test? Or
Denver, Philadelphia camps. Usually tests a lot of times take place when there's a national tournament. So in which, I used to compete a lot back, but there was, Philly and Cleveland and Denver and LA and Miami and Chicago and wherever all over. So I did a lot of traveling for competition. Canada, in the early days, those were real rough tournaments, because there was no protective equipment.
Oh, none at all.
No, none at all. And for one thing, you had to be very skillful. You couldn't just throw your foot out there and or your hand or punch, because there was no protective equipment. So you had to be skillful, get the point in, and try escape without getting hurt or hurting someone else. But that being said, There was a lot of people getting knocked out, teeth knocked out, broken arms, broken legs, because there was no protective equipment.
Was it considered full contact also then?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
It was rougher than what full contact is today in some places, just because there's no protective equipment.
Right. And when did the protective equipment come in? Even though I know when I started, it was minimal. It was like the white foam. Hand pads. Yeah.
I suppose we had to start doing that in the 80s when we got kids involved.
Oh, okay.
That was the big thing.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then insurance companies started to require it and so on, which only made sense. It only made sense. But
Yes.
we were, the traditional Japanese karate back in the day, that was pretty rough stuff.
And I suppose you break too many students, you run out of them. So you don't want to do
People
that.
Get hurt. And that's no fun.
Yeah. So what was your favorite part about competition for you?
Oh, I don't know. It was just like everyone thing else. Everybody, you want to have your good day. You want things to be on. You want to get in, get out, get your point, not get hurt, not hurt someone. Sometimes, but it was fun. I mean, you get revved up, the adrenaline's flowing, and when it's working and things, you can just see things. If you're trained for a long time, and you can just feel it and see it before it happens, and that's a pretty cool feeling.
Yeah.
Which you don't get that often. I mean, it happens, but you kind of look for that.
So with Shotokan, do you also have competition for kata or just for sparring?
Oh no, kata.
Okay.
And kata's that's as heavy as the sparring. I mean, as far as winning a kata competition, that's a big deal. Because that's a big deal. Because there's no chance. I mean, when you're kumite with another person, something can happen with him, something can happen with you, and then you luck out and get the point. When you're doing kata, you're out there by yourself.
It's all you.
It's all you, baby.
Yep.
You got to make it work.
I've always appreciated traditional kata, versus some of the more modern ones. Not as impressive. I mean, some of them are fun to watch. They're a little more flashy.
Well, they're real athletic and
Yes.
so on. But there's a basis for competition and how the body works. And a lot of the stuff that I see, I don't appreciate that much, just because I like the real deal. But I was not a kata person in my early years. I was just a fighter, and I liked kata, but I just wasn't good at it. I wasn't always the most limber. I didn't enjoy it as much. But then as later years, probably after when I was a Nidan or second degree black belt, all of a sudden I started realizing that better I was at kata, the more clean my sparring was.
Okay.
And people don't realize that. So when you see a real good karate person, they're rounded off. Their kata and their kumite are both strong. And if they're not, they're going to be weak somewhere. So kata is very supportive of sparring.
And what are some of the weapons that Shotokan uses?
Nothing.
You don't do weapons at all?
Karate means empty hand. Some people kind of forget that.
Well, I realize that, but I've also seen a lot of karate schools that use weapons. That's why I wasn't sure.
Well, that's why things have kind of gotten off track. But, that's what the base of karate was, empty hands. So and people go like, well, there's weapons. And I said, no, in actual karate, there are no weapons.
Nice. I like that. If you're approached by a friend or a parent and they're asking for advice on, we're thinking of getting our child in martial arts, or I'm thinking of joining martial arts, what type of tips, what type of advice would you give them on what to look for in a school and an instructor?
I tell them two things, basically. I said, go in there and look at it, and if it looks good to you and makes sense, using your common sense, it's probably good. If something if you kind of question it, then you have a good reason to question it. Why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Why are they rolling on the floor, doing somersaults, and giving them candy or whatever? And number two is be very leery of contracts. That's what really ruined the business, because even in the local area, the different businesses would come in. I won't name any names, of course, but this is everywhere. There was always a standard which I've maintained, which probably cost me a lot of business, but I've always held a standard for rank. And of course, everybody wants to be the black belt, and every parent wants to say, yeah, Johnny got his black belt, whatever. They don't care what he did to earn it. But what has happened is that people, a lot of these martial arts schools will come into town, and their whole criteria is get them in, just like selling them timeshare. They get them in an office, do the big sales pitch on them, and if you get Mikey and Michelle in here, we'll put them in our black belt program, and we'll do this $5,000 contract. We'll guarantee them their black belt in 18 months or 2 years. All you have to do is just pay that money, and which really ruined the the whole respect of rank.
Yes.
And plus, it's really hurt a lot of people financially. I don't know. Some people have challenged these contracts because, as you know, let's say if your child wants to get into some martial arts, get into a school. I mean, the average life of a beginning student is probably 3 months. You know, I've gone through, I don't even know how many 100,000 students, and over the last 45 years, and they just don't last that long. And then you're stuck with this 18-month contract, and that's pretty sad. So use common sense. Don't sign a contract. Yeah. Those are my 2 tips of advice to give you the short story.
Unless there's very clearly ways to get out of that contract,
right.
But there usually isn't, as you said. And a lot of those schools, unfortunately, that's where the nickname McDojo has come from over the last decade. It's get them in, get them out, fast food.
And what's bad is, what I feel bad is for the students, and this is just children, adults, they'll call me and they say, yeah, well, we've been doing this certain martial art for a long time, and he's got his whatever belt, and I'm a black belt, and we want to join into your school, and do we have to start over? And I go, well, let's just have you come in, wear your rank, and we'll take a look at it. We'll do what's called a rank adjustment if we need to. But I'll see people come in that even black belts over the years, and I'll say, well, why don't you show me your kata or your form or your pattern or whatever you would call it. We call it katas, of course. Yeah. Then this is a black belt. This has been 100 times. Yeah, I just can't remember. And I'm going, oh my gosh. I got students that will sometimes get together, black belts that I've had 30 years ago, and they'll do their kata from 30 years ago. I mean, because you had to do it hundreds and hundreds of times, and you don't forget that.
I still remember it. Was it hand Shotokan? Yeah, sure. I still remembered it. Well, I haven't done it in 30 years.
Yeah. So that's where things have gone. Things have gone downhill. So I have all the respect for, I'm not critical of other styles or whatever just because their name's something different. What I am critical about is technique and standards,
right? Which
is being lost, and it's really ruined the industry.
I know we had one of the schools I trained at, where I am, and 15, 20 years ago, to battle the whole contract thing, took out a big ad and like the take-home things for kids that they get at school, and basically said, if your child is stuck in a contract at a martial arts school that you don't enjoy, bring us the contract and you can finish out at our school, no charge until the contract's up, and gained a lot of students that way.
Really?
Yep. Yeah, it was a really good marketing thing.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Yeah. He wasn't in it for the money. He did it to teach, and it was a traditional school and stuff like that, and probably gained about 70, 80 students out of that deal. So, and some of them stuck with it, which is good. But, the parents were frustrated. They had to pay for it anyway. So might as well go to a better school. So,
well, one thing is, over the last years, and part of it was because I had to, I changed things. I relocated. I was at this dojo downtown for 27 years, and before that, other words. But the last years, I don't see near the numbers that I used to. It's really, and it's kind of spread out, but a lot of it is, I think a lot of people, families, and so on, they've had some bad experience with martial arts schools, and just because of the contract and this and that, it's really damaged the business.
Do you see less kids or less adults nowadays, or both?
Well, both, but mostly the last 7, 8 years for sure, less adults.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just, and I don't know. People are busier now, but yet they have time for other things. There's so many things in recreation to choose from.
Right.
And I think sometimes that commitment kind of scares people away. Because, if you're going to do it, you got to do it, minimum twice a week. Of course, I was different, but it was 6 days a week sometimes. And then it was sometimes even noon classes. But and I had students like that too, that were just phenomenal, but you just don't find those people that often anymore.
Well, there were many times where I was training 7 days a week.
Yeah.
When I was getting ready for my black belt test and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Then you're.
But I was young. I wasn't married. I had no kids. I had literally no free. I had all the free time in the world to just train. So it's different. So let me ask you this: in all your years in the martial arts, is there a specific philosophy that you've gained, or maybe one or two that really holds dear to your heart, or maybe a specific philosophy that you really impress upon your students? Is there one that stands out?
Well, no. I could tell some story and sound good and philosophical, but I've always been a common sense kind of guy. I always tell them the one thing is, if you are, whatever this is in training as an instructor, whatever your weakest area is. I mean, if you're weak in your kata or you're working your certain side kick or round kick or whatever, go back and do that and do that, because then you get through that, and that's your problem area. And your problems, when you overcome those problems make you stronger. That's the one thing I found out, especially doing kata. I was really challenged with that, and that was a real issue for a long time. And then finally, I got to do this, and I made that a priority, and then everything else got better.
Right. Kind of like back to the basics type thing.
Exactly.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. And a couple fun questions just to wrap it up. Maybe is there a favorite martial arts book that either you really enjoy that you maybe reread or you recommend to people?
My early years, it was, Gichin Funakoshi. He was the guy that from Okinawa introduced karate to Japan in the early, it was like 1921, 22, whatever. I think it's a little paperback, and I make all the students that are testing, especially kids, for black belt, they have to read this little book. And it just kind of gives you some neat history.
I actually still have that because you recommended it to me when I was
really?
Was one of my last classes with you because I was leaving for college, and I asked about a book recommendation. And I'm pretty sure I still have that Gichin Funakoshi paperback somewhere.
Yeah,
so
yeah, that was neat.
Yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah, but one thing about I forgot what I was going to say is that here it is. This is one thing I've always told students, which I realized through myself, because people go and practice and they train. And you train and you do this kick and you do this thing. And this is one thing that's unique about Shotokan Karate, because it makes you dig in deeper. You have to change things. You can't just go, okay, I can do this punch, I can do this kick, I can do this kata, whatever. But if you constantly do it the same, you don't change. You have to change things to improve. If you don't make changes, you stay the same. And a lot of people practice and they just do the same thing. This is the way I do it, and that's all there is to it. And some people can, and I went through this. I had it in my head, this is the way it was going to be. And then all of a sudden I found out from like Mr. Funakoshi or Mr. Yaguchi says, demon must change, not same. And I'm, what the hell are you talking about? Well, then finally I realized you have to change things. Well, really? And I tell people that you because you get stuck in that mode.
Yep.
It's like a runner. You run and you just run, and this is what you do. You don't change your technique and just a certain analogy, but you have to look how to change things, because you have to change to improve. That makes a lot of sense.
It does.
And as simple as that sounds, a lot of people can't do it.
Well, I think a lot of people too, a lot of instructors, you've heard it time and time again, do a kick 1,000 times to perfect it. Do it, do this 1,000 times. Well, it can't be, like you said, it can't be the same way 1,000 times.
No, that's exactly it.
But I think that's what they're hearing when they hear that.
Exactly.
People say that.
And that is part of it. I mean, how many times have I done that? Even our training camps, their big deal was like 500 kicks and 1,000 punches and this and that. But then pretty soon you got to be careful what technique you're developing, because you can, if your mind's not into it, you can either develop a good technique, or 1,000 times you can develop a bad technique. So
plus, I think if you try to do it the same way 1,000 times,
well, that's just it.
The last half are going to get lazy.
Right.
Yep. And kind of final question, or maybe two, depending on your answer. Do you have a favorite martial arts TV show and/or favorite martial arts movie? Maybe like a guilty pleasure. If it's on, you just got to sit and watch it.
Oh, you know what? I can't say that I do. I mean, some of the stuff is fun to watch, but it's not real stuff. You know what I mean? And people go like, oh, that's real stuff. Well, I don't know. You see some neat techniques and some neat demonstrations, but no, I don't have a favorite.
How about this one? Is there one that stands out as you think is at least the most real, as far as, I know there's some that depict certain styles much better than others. Any that stand out, or you think maybe a specific martial artist on screen really shows what it's about?
There probably is, but I don't pay it a whole lot of attention.
That's good though.
There was one movie, and I someone brought to karate camp years ago. It was called Black Belt something. It was a bunch of kind of karate guys. They were mostly Japanese that were. It was the real deal. There was no like special effects or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can't think of the movie, but that was kind of fun to watch because it was the real deal. And these guys, probably some of those guys got hurt doing what they did, but there was no special effects. And
I thought of one more final question, just opinion question. Being a traditionalist all these years, what are your thoughts on something like the UFC and like professional MMA type fighting?
Well, that's a whole different thing. It's like basketball and football or whatever. I mean, it's really, of course, they punch and kick and so on, but it's totally different than what karate is. Karate is more technique orientated, and from the technique you can become a good become a good fighter, but that's not the motivation. Where this is the motivation is to, beat the heck out of the other guy. And some of these guys are good athletes. The only thing is that it hurts. People watch this stuff, and after being punched and kicked thousands of times myself, it hurts, and you don't always heal. I've got some permanent injuries, and these guys, I'm not criticizing them, but the fact of the matter is, they're going to have permanent injuries. But that's what our society loves to watch combat, and they love to watch someone get hurt.
Yes,
which is really weird. That's just the way it is.
No, I agree. And I mean, and luckily the sport has changed. I mean, because I started watching it back in the 90s when there was literally no rules. And I mean, that was a lot more brutal, and it's still dangerous now, obviously, but at least they've put in the safety things that, for the safety of the athletes, which is good. So
no, it's rough stuff. I wish these guys well. I'm glad I don't have to do it.
Me too. I judged it before.
Yeah.
No interest in getting in there. That's for sure. And I can take a hit. I mean, luckily I was born with a strong head, but no thanks.
Yeah, I've had enough, been there, done that. Maybe if it was 30 years ago, I might have a little different opinion. But
kind of the same for me. So, well, I just want to thank you, sir, for taking the time to sit down with us and talk a little bit about yourself. And if there's any links, if you want me to put a link for your school in the show notes, I can do that. Let people know to check it out.
Yeah, just Central Minnesota Karate. I officially started the business in 1976, so I've been around for a long time. That's about all I got to give for now.
It's a good traditional martial art, so check it out for sure. So,
all right, thanks.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.